Hey everyone, and welcome to Craft Quest on Call. I'm Ryan Ireland from craftquest.io. Thanks for joining us this evening. I am here with my regular co-host on Craft Quest on Call, Andrew Welch. Hello, Mr. Welch from the greater northern New York area. I don't want to violate your OPSEC here.
It's fine. If anyone wants to come get me, they can come get me. It's all good.
Oh,
I'm
whoops.
good.
Hang on, I got...
Oh no, that was me.
Oh, okay,
That
I
was
thought I
that
had
was
it too.
me making a rookie mistake.
No, I have it running too.
Oh God, we both do.
We both were checking the stream, and so that's why you heard all that.
Yeah, we've done this. We've done this before.
Yeah, I know. We're good at this. This is our thing. All right, Andrew. We are. I feel like every stream, we're taking it up maybe a tenth of a notch, right?
Mm-hmm.
About something like that. If I'm looking over here, there's this big picture of Andrew over here to my left.
I am notchless. Like nothing has changed on my end. I've
Well,
got
we didn't.
no more notches.
No, I think you're notched out, right?
I'm notched out, dude.
It's time. It's gonna be time for a new belt once you wait.
Yeah.
Anyway, let me check the chat. Hello, Andrea. Hello, John. Welcome back to the. Oh, we have an Andrea question today, actually.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good.
You need to get her on Skype. She can ask.
You really
live.
should. You should get her on. Let her ask in person.
Yeah. Andrea, DM me your Skype name if you have one, and I can add you in here. We have a few minutes before we get to your question. We're gonna do a crazy live here. We had 3 people last week or 2 weeks ago on the live stream when Brandon was on. It went well. That was the first time we had done 3. So for me, technically, it was a little bit more of a challenge than I'm used to.
Yeah, and then we did the one with Matt Gray, and he hit the wrong button, so he got disconnected, and he turned into a white ghost, right?
So that's why I need to get a new camera, because I use software to control the what's it called? The exposure on the camera that I use, and for some reason, it's a Logitech software. For some reason, it just resets itself. So that's why I came up like all over exposed, and then it took me a second to try to find the software again. All right, but you're not here to talk about video setups.
I'm not?
No. Although we need to do like a Craft Quest Cribs video. We can.
No.
You can give a tour of the office.
No, I'm just gonna veto that. Nobody cares.
Nobody cares. All right.
No,
I almost had a special lower third for you today, but I couldn't get it done in time. I'll save it for next time. All right,
While
Andrew.
You're talking. I'm gonna do the thing.
Oh, all right. That's right. We're drinking.
I'm gonna do the thing.
Old man drink. Oh, what's that called? Onomatopoeia.
Yeah. No, this is called cognac.
It's a big glass.
I'm not drinking no onomatopoeia.
I need to hang on.
Oh, you're talking about the AMSR?
Yeah. Not onomatopoeia.
No, people don't listen to AMSR from people like me. The demo for people who are AMSR streamers are young female. That's pretty much it.
Moving on. So we're going to answer your questions. If you haven't yet asked a question on Craft Quest on Call, then you can do that if you go to craftquest.io/on-call. Is that hard enough for everyone to remember? And I always have a little embedded form here. Really easy. Name, question, and then that'll get dropped into our super fancy backend that I engineered and designed in Airtable. But we'll be able to keep track of that and also know the ones that we answered. And then we'll talk about yours on the air here live, which will also be on the recording at craftquest.io/livestreams, which is where you are right now watching this. If we don't answer the question today, we just leave them queued and we'll eventually get to it. So ask away. All right, Andrew. Last time we met, we were talking about Craft 3.5. I think since then there has been a handful of updates to 3.5, some point releases to 3.5. I think there's even been some changes to the showing and hide or showing the field handles. I think there might have been like an accessibility problem by using the option key or something like that. So there's been some changes. So keep an eye on that. I do have some Craft 3.5 questions. So let's start with one from Novo Web Design. This person says, "Hi, has the way caching works changed in 3.5?" I think they had noticed maybe something was a little bit different in 3.5.
Is that for me? You want me to take that? You want to take that?
I want you to take it. And I also saw I didn't include it here, but there was a question that I came across on Stack Exchange. Someone was also asking about the caching had seemed to be different. They didn't see they didn't see it in the database anymore, is what they were asking about.
Well, they don't see it in the database anymore because by default, it is not in the database anymore. So Yi has always had a caching layer that a lot of people have, well, not a lot, but I have been leveraging for a long time. A decent number of people have been leveraging. But Craft itself didn't use the Yi cache for all that much, really. I think there were some parts of the plugin store that used, and they added like tiny bits that were using it. And so it got confusing because we talked about template caches and, different caching methods and that type of thing. And people thought if they changed their caching method via Yi to Redis or Memcache or whatever they wanted to, that it would change the way Craft does its template caching, and it didn't, right? Because it was not boutique, but like a custom implementation that they did for Craft, and it was very database dependent. And so what you would have is you would have like potentially a ton of rows in your database for template caches, element template caches, and element query. And there are a couple of tables that were in there. And they could actually get really big depending on what you were doing and how you were caching these things, especially because the way that it did it for the element queries is it stored the actual serialized element query object in the table row. And those actually can be pretty big depending on what's going on with it. So in Craft 3.5, they changed the whole thing around. So they got rid of the whole boutique little caching layer that goes in the database. And now everything leverages the Yi data caches. So if you change your caching method, let's say you've been using Redis all along for your caching, just like magic, the template caches that you use are going to be stored in Redis, and it's all going to work as expected. So this is a good thing because you're no longer going to see those crazy long deleting stale template caches tasks, that get queued up all over the place. And it's nice because it's leaning on the Yi caching method. Mm-hmm. So it's very flexible because you can put it anywhere you want it to. Your database isn't going to be bloated with all these caches that you don't need. And just in general, it simplifies the way that the caching is done. And because it simplifies it, I think that it's better. I think it was trying to do an awful lot. And cache invalidation is one of those things. And computer science is it's really hard.
Like naming?
Yeah, like naming, but worse. So do you want me to launch into how it works under the hood?
Yeah. Let's let's do it.
So when you store stuff into the cache, so if you go to, actually, I'll give you a URL to go to.
Okay.
And wow, that's awesome. I love Google, man. I spelled it wrong, and it still totally went to the right place. I love it. So I'll put it in our little Skype chat. But basically, this is the Yi2 caching page.
All right.
And it tells you how to do it. And, this is their PHP because Yi is written in PHP. We're not expecting people to necessarily, start writing any PHP, but it does explain and give a good overview of how their cache works. And basically the way it works is that when you set something to put something into the cache, you set, okay? Mm-hmm. And the minimum thing that you can pass in there is you pass in the key and the data, right? So here's the key, set, here's the data, and then later on I can get that data with the key and it pulls it back out of the cache. That's like the simplest way to do it. Yi also has a concept of tag dependencies. So for any little chunk of data that is in the cache, you can attach a tag to it. And a tag is just kind of like a unique reference to the thing. And using those tags, and you can think of it kind of like you might, maybe you got a blog and you've got a bunch of different tags you put on different articles, right? So maybe one tag would be, if it's a tech article, it's tagged as tech, right? And if it also talks about animals, maybe it would have an animals tag, right? And using these tag dependencies, you can then tell it, hey, any tag that has animal on it, I want you to clear it and get rid of that, right? So using these tag dependencies, it's kind of taking the place of all of that custom stuff that was stored in the database, in that Elements are able to attach the tags that it needs for a particular element. So when an element is saved, it gives a bunch of tags to Craft and says, Craft, whenever you modify this element, you need to invalidate any cache that has these tags associated with it. And first of all, I think from an architectural point of view, I think it's fantastic that they're leveraging the
It's more
Yi cache.
targeted, right? Rather than just dumping it all.
Yeah, I mean, well, what it did before, it didn't dump it all. It tried to be super smart, like what element is contained in what,
Oh,
and
got it. Yeah.
all that kind of stuff.
So it was slow.
And it worked great if you were working on a small site and you wanted it just to work automatic. When you started getting up into scale, it would just fall over. It just wasn't the right thing and that's why a lot of people working on kind of more interesting or larger traffic sites, they don't even use it. They didn't even use the caches because they ended up being counterproductive for what they were doing. But that's, for the most part, you as a person that makes websites, you don't really need to know how it works under the hood, except that the benefits of getting up and running on Redis are even more now, because before, like I was saying, maybe some plugins used the Yi caching method. Maybe you would use it for sessions. We did a live stream where we talked about that. But the meat and potatoes, like the template caches, we're still not using that, right? So some people were just like, well, it's not worth the effort to use Redis. Well, now it is, because now the template caches are going to be using whatever caching method that you set up,
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a good in-depth explanation, and I hope that Nova Web Design was listening. And one thing I'm going to do actually is start to cut up.
There's more.
Oh, I was going to cut you off. Go
no,
ahead.
There's more.
All right.
So the only real caveat about this system is that Elements are supposed to tell Craft what tags should be cleared, as I mentioned before, when that element is modified.
Right.
And the only rub there is that third-party elements need to register their tags if they want it to be broken in a more fine-grained manner. So, for instance, I think Supertable and Neo, haven't been updated to add this in yet. It will still bust the cache, but it will do it in a much more broad, it won't be very fine-grained because it doesn't know any specific tags that are associated with it. So it just clears them all.
Huh.
Yeah.
You left me speechless.
I'm sorry. It's kind of sad, but I think this is great that they're doing this. It's more scalable. I've been doing in my plugins, I've been using and leveraging this E2 cache for forever. So it's very familiar to me. Even if you haven't been using it before, you're not really going to notice a difference from the point of view of anything you have to change. You still just use a cache tag and everything should just work. But you should notice that there's no more stacked massive parallel deleting template caches stuff.
Yeah.
And you should notice that there's no more bloat in your database And there will be a benefit to looking into implementing Redis for your caching method. The default caching method is the file-based method,
Right.
which works, but you're going to end up with just a ton of stuff in your file system, and it's not the most efficient at scale, I would say.
All right. Are you done?
I don't know. Depends. Depends on whether you ask any follow-up questions, whether you got any confused look on your face. Well, I can't even see your face. Let me see. Are you confused?
I'm not like
I'm
just
looking-
in
I'm looking at
general. In general,
No.
yes.
No, you don't look confused.
Currently, at the moment, I'm not. So I want to
Okay.
say hi to Evan and Jalen have joined and chatted. There's more than them at my little box here. Tells me
Yeah, and then if anyone
that
in
there's
chat,
more
if I
people
didn't,
than that.
I was just gonna say, if anyone in chat, if I didn't explain something about the new caching method in Craft 3.5, and you got follow-up questions, like ask them. We're monitoring the chat. We'll look at it.
Yep. Absolutely. So next up, we're gonna keep going because I think some of these are gonna be, we might get into a long discussion about it.
Oh, you know what? I just noticed in watching when I was like peering to see what your face looked like, to see if you were confused.
Yeah.
I think this may be like, I think this camera may distort things. So I may look like, how they've got the pictures of the dogs with the really big noses? No? If I get really close? No?
Nobody tell him. All right. So
Okay.
it's all right. Hang on. I just heard a chat thing go. Evan says he's late, so we should start over. We will definitely do that. Good thing we started a few minutes late and we had a little bit of banter about Craft Quest cribs. I can't even say that without sounding like a 2-year-old. All right. Next question. Oh, actually, so Andrea put in a question this week, but I'm gonna wait.
Oh, wait, we got a follow-up question. Should I go for it? Yeah, so Jalen Davenport says, if you're not using Redis, the caches are stored somewhere in the file system. Correct. So with 3.5, templates caches move from the database to the file system. Yeah, so if you do nothing, the caches have moved from the database to the file system. However, they've also been simplified, so there's no kind of crazy querying logic going on there. It's more just a bunch of tags that are associated with it that will let Craft know when this thing should be cleared. And some of the logic has been put into the element type itself to allow this to happen. But yeah, by default, it's using files that are sitting on the file system. So, and it will work. It will be fine. I would just recommend that for any sites that receive a decent amount of traffic, Redis is always a wonderful thing to use. And almost every hosting setup that is worth anything has Redis pre-installed. And literally, it's a couple of lines in your app.php config file.
And we have talked about Redis on this live stream. I want to say we did a whole live stream on it. In fact, enhancing performance in Craft with Redis. There it is.
There you go. Boom.
All right.
And actually, this video is now, there's a lot more truth in advertising in this video.
Why is that?
Well, because it's doing the template caching.
Right.
That's going into Redis now. So that's a big part of what a lot of people think of when they think of caching with Craft. They think of the template caches,
So if I already have Redis configured on my site, do I need to do anything?
Yeah, like I said, you need to make a couple of changes in your app.php.
Okay.
And there's an article, Craft has an article on their site, or Pixelantonic has an article on their site. Setting up Redis Craft CMS. Let's see if it does it. Oh, wow, look at that.
Matt came up first.
I know, that is amazing. Good.
Matt's got some good. I've noticed that he's really killing it with the. I mean, I don't. But
Shout out to
yeah,
SEO
because
Matic.
the one thing that drew me actually, and where we decided on the topic of the live stream last week was one of his articles about the ephemeral file system, which I don't know
Right.
if you remember if you watched it, where we exploited a sample site that I had,
Yep.
and then showed how it how it
I
could
watched the whole thing,
we could
Ryan.
recover from it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So adding Redis to Craft CMS. So this is from January. So this is still
Yeah.
like, all
But
good.
you forget about Matt, because Matt, I so far have no commissions from him at all for served. So instead, go to that link.
Did you send me another link?
Yeah, I sent you no. I mean, I'm kidding. His article is fine, but there also is official craft docs. So both are other,
Oh, you
whatever.
didn't send me. I didn't see a link that you sent.
Yep, it's in. Yeah,
Oh,
there you go. Yeah. So set it up, Jalen. It's not hard. Set it up.
Yeah, we'll. I wasn't prepared for this, but maybe we can do it next time.
Yeah, and Andrew's asking, would we see this when you're running the Redis command? And yeah, if you do, I forget what it is, like Redis CLI or whatever, and then you can do monitor or something like that, and then you'll see everything coming in. You'll see the caches coming in and out. You'll see things getting invalidated. You'll see all that fun stuff.
How about these new docs? It just feels so like warm and friendly.
I know. I mean, as much as it pains me to say it, Matt actually did a really good job on it.
All right, let's move on.
He sings about weird stuff, but he does good docs.
So uncomfortable. So here's an interesting one. I think somebody says, says searching and filtering. They want to implement searching and filtering for thousands of entries in a section that they have. They want the users the ability to search all of those entries from the Vue.js front end, and asking, do you implement the logic using the Element API, or do you add a module to Craft, which is the best approach to get access to the data?
All right, so hold on. So first of all, what's on the screen is still the docs, right?
Yeah, I don't have the questions on the screen.
Okay.
This is a submitted question. Sorry. Well,
you couldn't put him. You can't put him in like text edit, Ryan.
Sorry, Andrew. Sorry, I wasn't prepared enough for you. Sorry that you had to drive down to your barn and just show up and everything is ready to go.
Oh, it's so sad. That's exactly what happened too. I was so sad. I was stuffing my face with pizza, and then I'm like, Ryan, this is really sad. I'm driving down to do this. Oh, you put it in Vim. All right, so that's sufficiently nerdy. That's good. Searching and filtering, thousands of entries in a section. Now I'd like to give me a collection of items.
So basically, a building search from Vue.js front end.
Yeah.
How would you implement this using the Element API, Craft? I mean, GraphQL. Like, what's like if you this was your, we're just, let's say we're kind of like whiteboarding an initial approach here. We're doing like a discovery ticket in Jira. How would we? Or what would be like your riff here on this?
I mean, I did exactly this, like literally exactly this for a basically a food virus kind of website, where it used a faceted search where you were able to, and it used Vue on the front end.
I've heard about it.
Yeah, I know. And then it used GraphQL to do the querying. And it does exactly what you're talking about. Like, it does a faceted search kind of thing where you can have a set of entries, and then you can filter it down based on whatever criteria you want. And I actually blogged about the whole thing. Like, there are a couple of blogs up on nystudio107.com. One of them is called something or other postmortem. And then there's another one on using Craft CMS headless with the GraphQL API. Yeah, the postmortem is it's called Postmortem Outbreak Database. But go to nystudio107.com articles, and then those two articles are on the main page there, and they detail like exactly what was done, and especially the postmortem article is more like an overview. and showing the before and after. The using Craft CMS headless with the GraphQL API article shows you all the code, like shows you all the things in terms of how everything was done and all that kind of good stuff. So, I mean, the question that is being asked here is so, it's kind of like asking, how do I build my site?
But I think for someone new to craft, they might not know like what's the preferred approach. But this is how I would have answered it, right? To me, this is like an approach question, not like, tell me how to do it, basically.
All right.
Although in those 2 articles, you probably give almost everything someone would need to know how to do it, other than writing the code for them.
I mean, even the code is in there.
There we go.
You can copy and paste a lot of it. But what is your answer in terms of the approach?
Yeah, I would say don't do element API, like GraphQL. That was it. You're running Vue.js. That's GraphQL plus Vue.js would be the only combination that I would even use.
Mm-hmm.
I had forgotten about the outbreak. I mean, I hadn't forgotten about the project, but just forgot about the that was an example that you could recall. That's good.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally what they're asking for here, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, basically the way that it works is Vue is on the front end, and there's like a little search field, and then there are a bunch of other fields where you can specify other things to cull it down. And actually there's a video on the postmortem page that will show the thing actively working and doing stuff. Yeah, right there. So if you play this, wow, this is really meta. We got like video and video here. But you enter some keywords and it dynamically will find the search results, and then you can further refine things down, saying I only want if the vehicle is unknown and whatever. And you'll see that the results are dynamically filtered or dynamically displayed down there. So we got down to just 3 that were salmonella with the unknown vehicle and the keyword vomit, right?
Right.
And I think this is it's probably a pretty good approach to do it, because the way it works is you type in what you want on the front end. It builds a GraphQL query that basically tells GraphQL and Craft on the back end how to search for this stuff, and then the results are returned, and then there's just a component that displays the results, and that's it.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think you had a lot of fun with that project, if I remember correctly.
I mean, other than the fact that it involved vomit and botulism and all sorts of other horrible things. Do you rinse your
vegetables now before you eat them? No, you should.
Nah.
You should. Cross-contamination.
I just don't eat vegetables. That's all.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a good way to go. All right.
I'm kidding.
All right. So let's get to another question. And this one I'm choosing to do now because like it's more of like a general approach thing. And it reminded me of something that I have talked about in the past. So well,
you should answer it then.
Well, I am going to, but you're not just it's not just stump the chump here. It's not just you.
Did you just call me a chump?
Well, I mean, no.
Everybody heard that, right? Everybody heard that? Okay. Truth has come out. Okay. All right. Go ahead.
So this is one from Stack Exchange. I picked a couple from Stack Exchange that I thought we could at least have a good discussion about. Mm-hmm. How can I ensure certain items always display at the end of a list? This person has a website. They want to show, this is like, looks like a list of like products or materials maybe, or finishes. Mm-hmm. And the powder coat one, they always want to have at the end. Right? The data goes into Craft in an unpredictable order from a third-party service, so I am responsible for organizing it in the front end. Uh-huh. Is there a way I can spit out or force the PC items to always appear at the end of the list in my template? So, there is actually a question, an answer done where you can filter it by ID. Like I would always say, like that would be the last way that I would do it, because that's you're basically hard coding your template code against an ID, which you don't want to do. Especially, let's say this is loaded to a system, it just basically gets refreshed every time. I don't know. It may not be reliable.
And by the way, James, I'm sorry that Ryan just crapped all over your answer, because he's kind of rude.
No. I'm not like honestly, that would totally work. And if that was
we're not crapping on anyone. No. I'm totally kidding. We're basically like we're looking at opportunities to see if there's any way we could give a better, improve.
I was actually
that's what it's here for.
I was actually looking at this morning while I was waiting for the window replacement guy to show up.
Mm.
And I thought, oh, like what would be like a really kind of clever code solution to this?
Uh-huh.
And then I said, maybe this actually isn't a code solution at all. Maybe we need to rethink how we're organizing this content. Because it's pretty easy. I mean, we could still do this thing at the bottom here where we're basically just filtering out like an entry or set of entries and then dropping them down. But I wouldn't do it by ID. Maybe we need to think about how we like structure and model the data, the content in Craft. Even if it's being ingested automatically, we can still control that. I can still key off of like PC here and classify that as all powder coat stuff, right? This is Roman brass. And then maybe we tag it or categorize it. There might be other benefits. I don't know. I have no idea what site this is, but there might be other benefits as well. So I was thinking maybe approaching it from how we model the content or the data in Craft versus just kind of brute forcing it in the code.
Yeah. So what you're basically saying is whatever this number is, and I don't know what the number is.
Yeah.
You're saying
ID or something.
Okay. So you're saying separate that out into a separate field, so you've got a product ID and a finish. Is that what you're saying, or are you saying something else?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And assuming there's no other data that comes along with this stuff, right? Is this like is this all the brass finishes? You know, like maybe that's not enough. But if there's another way of classifying powder coat, then I would try to break that out.
Yeah, because I bet you they've got an internal system where the ID is this number and the finish combined. Like that is the actual ID that they use in their SKU everywhere.
I guess you could. But you're right. You could just search for this instead of the entry ID and do it that way too, if it's always going to be the same.
No, but you're right. Like if this was broken out from an information architecture point of view, if you had ID and you had finish and they were separate fields, then it's simply a matter of doing, order by, and then the finish, whatever, or however you want to do it. Like that gives you the flexibility of in the query, you can get it to order it the way that you want it to, which is ideally what you really want. Like Twig, I know you can do a lot in Twig, but ideally the data should be in as close to the format as you're going to use on the front end as possible.
Right.
When coming from the back end. So I like your idea of kind of massaging the data as it comes in order to make that happen.
Right. And it made me think of, this is a very like elementary setup, but it's a short set of videos I have on just kind of the process of taking like some sort of set of requirements and then modeling that content into Craft, right? That's the work that we don't want to skip, especially when we get data in from outside sources.
And you're right. Like that is something that a lot of people do skip.
Right. You just go right into like building fields and.
Yeah, you're like, oh, okay, this is the ID, and then what happens is people end up with some absolutely atrocious amount of either code to manipulate the data or some kind of like crazy queries and multiple queries to try and get it right. It's like, no, man, like if you just put it in the right format, it'll just ease its way in and you'll be good to go.
Yeah.
I see that all the time. And a lot of the people that are doing like a whole bunch of, Neo in Super Table in Matrix, like these crazy, they're building out their information architecture that way. Sometimes there are ways that you can do that isn't going to result in an information architecture that's just going to fall over, Yeah. I like your idea. Because it's a matter of putting the work in the right place. Mm-hmm. And if you put a little bit of work in massaging the data into the format that you want, everything else is just going to flow. Whereas if the data is in a crappy format to begin with, you're going to be out there with a hammer pounding screws in all day long.
Yeah, as a good analogy. Another one is like 20, 25, 26 years ago when I was in school, one of my original majors was recording industry. So we learned how like to do things like with microphones and recording and tape.
Did you though? Did you learn?
Well, I mean, look at me now. I always seem to end up in front of a microphone. I guess I'm forever the AV guy with the AV cart. So, but one of the things we did, and I actually still do today, and that was taught to us, was get your audio exactly how you want it going to tape. Don't rely on a bunch of manipulations. Of course, now with computers and all the plugins, it's like infinitely accessible to all sorts of changes. But get everything going. And I actually do that to this day. Like when I record my screencast, the audio that I record, I don't manipulate it at all ever. Like just it's tweaked for volume because everything goes through outboard like hardware that processes it, and then it's right when it hits tape. It's exactly what I want. So it's the same approach here.
Yeah.
Is get your data right when you get it in, and if you know what you are functionally supposed to be doing, what the spec is for the project, then you can think about it. It's the same reason that when you write like APIs, is that you plan those APIs out. Like I've written even like just the JSON out in the past. Just like what is the output going to be, so I kind of can understand like what it's going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
And that way you're not having to like do a bunch of patching as you go. All right. So that was mine, but this would also work too, right? This is definitely faster and easier. So it also depends on the project. I mean, it could be that like we just have to get this done. And
right. So if it's a little site and it doesn't need to scale,
right.
And there's only like, a small number of entries that are on the page or whatever, you can totally do it this way, where you do one query and then you filter it and then you display everything. You display everything without the powder coat, and then you do a second loop where you display the powder coat stuff. Right? You can totally do that. Like that's one way you can do it. You could also do it in 2 queries. You could do 2 queries where you get everything that doesn't have PC, and then you get everything that does, and then you can just loop through them and display them there. One is telling the database to do the work. The other is telling Twig to do the work. You could profile it and see which is better. Right. It's not always obvious. Reducing the number of queries that you have is great, but more important is making sure that you're timing how much time it takes to actually render the page. Because let's say I managed to cut the number of queries in half, but I don't save any time or very little time. Like, what's the point? So definitely profile it to see which is better. And you're right, man. Like, depending on the project, it may be more than fine.
Right. I mean, and
to
this
just
isn't
do what's
like,
here.
I mean, this is like this is, I think, interesting code to write, especially if you're like new to Twig, right? Using the filter and then the
closures they still feel weird to me in Twig.
Yeah, I know.
They just do because Twig is supposed to be a presentational templating language, and I mean it's useful. Don't get me wrong, and I got nothing against closures. It just always feels a little weird.
Yeah, there's so much of it that's just like a nice veneer over PHP too. So,
well, there's always a tension, right? I mean, Twig. You might say, like, why not just do it in PHP? Well, the point is I don't want to have to learn PHP to do all this. And then it also provides like a nice safe layer for you. But there's always a tension, like, well, why can't I do this in Twig?
Right.
Because that would make it like a full programming language, and at some point there's a scope and you got to stop it, All
right. Are you ready for another question?
I guess.
Okay. This one is from Andrea, and this has come up before, and I feel like this has been a recurring theme over the last few live streams, which is please discuss the different methods of updating Craft and Craft plugins, pros, cons, limitations of each, and your recommendations. Asking for a friend. Andrea, I hope it didn't say I should keep anonymous. No. Okay.
Too late now, man. You just blew her up.
It's a good question. So, I think this comes out of like the mixing of updating via Composer and updating via the Craft updater, which is also the same, I assume the same thing as what's running the updates via the control panel. Somebody you did a survey, right?
I did.
Of how people update. And what did you find? I need to see if I can find that.
Yeah, I'm pulling it up now. So basically, I sent out a tweet And I essentially asked people, how is it that you update your site? And I gave them their craft site, I should say. And I gave them 3 choices. I said web control panel.
Mm-hmm.
I said craft update. So that's the CLI, like the craft CLI. And then the last one was composer update. And I was a little surprised by the results. I was not surprised, honestly, that a lot of people still use the web control panel. And
Do you think there's people that might feel like they should say one thing and not the other?
I don't know. I mean, you never know what the bias is. You can just put it out there and see what's what. But I am writing an article on all of this. And I don't know, do you know anything about yoga or Buddhism or anything like that, Ryan?
I do. I would never profess to be an expert, but yes, I can have a
me
conversation about it. Oh, okay.
Me either. I'm not even close.
Despite
but
our
they've got
hair,
this-
we are not Buddhists.
Yeah. I mean, my kids tell me I look like the statue of the fat Buddha. They're like, "Is that you?" I'm like, "Ah, damn it, kids." Unbelievable.
That's so good. You got good kids.
Oh yeah, I got great kids. But basically, there's a concept of the eightfold path to enlightenment, right? So they get a couple of rules of how you're supposed to live. So I'm playing off of that. And so I'm writing an article on updating craft, and it's called The Fourfold Path to Updating Craft CMS Enlightenment.
Wow.
Working title. Yeah.
Does it require a year in the forest alone?
Well, you might
that'll
want
solve
to.
the update
You might want
problem.
to after the update doesn't work. You might just want to just
After you
give
get
up.
the error.
Yeah,
I think
might
it was
just
actually
wanna leave.
somebody said they hold their breath when it starts to run the migrations.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't hold your breath when what's happening. So the number one thing, so I'm listing on there. So in the eightfold path, they have right, living and right this and right that. So I'm playing off of that. So number 1 is right environment. And that is, do not update in live production. Like, just don't do it.
Do we have to keep
you
saying,
laugh.
do we have to keep saying that?
No, absolutely. You laugh, but it's perfectly reasonable that people might do that. And why is it perfectly reasonable? Well, they're coming from WordPress, where perfectly fine, you log into the live production site and you click update, and it will update WordPress, it will update the plugins, like all of that stuff is going to happen, right?
Right.
And even perfectly logical, they're coming from Craft CMS. Used to be in Craft 2, wasn't that long ago that people were just, clicking update and not using Composer and all that kind of stuff. So number 1 is right environment. Update and test in local dev. And then once you know everything is working, deploy the composer.lock to your production and let it go. And then number 2 is right location. And what I mean by location here is do not update. This 31.2% of you that answered web control panel, do not update via the web control panel. Like, just
Why do you say that? It's still running safe. Like, it's still a safe approach. It's if anything, it's a craft approved approach, right? It's the routines that they wrote. So why no?
Because Craft is using Composer. Composer is super greedy and kind of slow when you run it via PHP as part of a web request.
They have their own packaged version of Composer, right? Inside of Craft? Yeah.
And it's perfectly reasonable that PHP FPM has timeouts for web requests. And the idea is that you've got like a pool of workers, and you don't want one worker to be tied up forever for some request that is just taking an incredible amount of time. So it makes complete sense that a web request is only going to last for a certain amount of time before it terminates. Well, when you're updating stuff via the web, it's not wonderful. Like, it can time out, and that will result in like a half done thing, and migrations can, and all sorts of nasty stuff can fail.
And if you're doing the updates properly, where you're not doing them live on the site.
Mhm.
You're doing them hopefully locally in a dedicated Git branch just for the update. So if it does go wrong, you can just trash it and continue on.
Yeah.
There's really no reason not to do it from the command line then at that point.
Yeah. Well, and if you think that I'm crazy in saying this, if
Well,
you
it's a
scroll
whole
down in
different.
that,
I don't have a question for that, but go ahead.
yeah, if you scroll down in that thread, Craft CMS or Brandon, one or the other, I don't know, it could be the same, actually ended up answering in one of the threads and basically said, we're probably going to remove updating from the CP in a future version of Craft.
Wow.
Um,
Well, that was the big. I remember when Craft came out, it was like
Yeah.
a big deal that it was like in place updates. You don't have to like
Right.
mess with everything. But then I think everyone quickly realized like updating in place on production,
yeah. Well,
not a great idea.
okay. So I think, in fairness, like I think what they're probably going to do is they probably are going to leave the button there, right? So for everyone that just they don't want to deal with the CLI, they click the button there, and then I think it's going to do it the same way that database backups work, which is that it's going to execute a CLI command to do the actual thing.
Okay.
You know? So I think you're still going to be able to technically do it from the web CP, but it's not going to be done as part of the web request. It's going to start like a background CLI process that does it. And the reason is CLIs don't have these timeouts. So when you run PHP via the CLI, it's assumed that it's a trusted process that's being run, and it doesn't have a time limit on it. You
Right.
know? So my guess is, again, I don't know, but my guess is that is probably what they're going to do. But in the interim, as far as write location is concerned, do not click update in the Craft CP. Just because you're probably going to waste your time is really what it is, you know?
Okay. So that's one Craft approved way that we shouldn't do. The next one is in the command line. We have the Craft executable.
Yeah.
We can execute different commands.
Yeah.
There's a whole updater in there. Craft update / info. Right. Give me an understanding of what I have. That's plugins and everything. It tells me what's available.
Yeah. So this falls under my third one, which is write path. So either pick the Craft CLI or ./craft update, or actually it should be PHP Craft update so that it works on Windows as well.
Right.
And that runs Craft's own internal stuff, but it does it via the CLI. That's the important part, is that it's happening via the CLI because we don't have the timeouts that a web process would have. It's still running Composer. The advantage of doing it via this is, well, there are a couple advantages. One is that Craft can put whatever custom logic that they want in there. So for instance, it can make sure that you don't update any plugins past what you have paid renewals for, which can be a good thing, because otherwise if you update them, it's going to start flagging and throwing these red notices saying that there's a licensing error and all that kind of stuff.
Get a little red expired, license expired text or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And because Composer doesn't know anything about plugin licenses or any of that stuff.
Publicly available packages.
I still think that may that's not the most wonderful advantage, because I still do think that you should be updating. You should be keeping these plugins and stuff up to date. You know, I don't think it's a great idea to just leave it sitting in old version. But anyway, that is an advantage. The other advantage of doing it via the Craft CLI is that you're doing it in a way that doesn't require that you have Composer installed on your native environment, right? Because Composer is a PHP package that they brought in. So if you do it via the Craft command line, you don't have to have Composer installed in your local dev environment or whatever environment it is. And the update command will still work because it uses the PHP or the Composer that's in a PHP package that's part of Craft. The other way you can do it is you can just update via Composer. The right path maxim, though, is pick one. Okay?
So don't mix and match?
Don't cross the streams. Like, just don't do it. Because it has to do with the way that Craft Update works. When it updates stuff, it puts the exact version that it updated to into the composer.json.
Yep.
And that gets rid of these semver characters that you might have in there, like a up caret and a tilde. I don't think I can make a tilde with my fingers. Hold on.
You're making a good effort.
Tilde and whatever. It removes all those. And so the reason not to jump from one to the other is that because Craft puts the exact version numbers in there, Composer Update will never update anything, because when you put just a version number in there, Composer sees that as you want exactly this.
It's locking you to that version,
and it locks it in.
But sometimes you want that, right?
It's fine if you want it, then that's fine, right? But my point is, like, when you do Composer create project Craft CMS / Craft, it will create a nice composer.json file that has semvers in it. Okay. Yeah, here's a perfect example. So the Craft CMS is properly semvered, right? It's got a caret, which means everything up to Craft 4.0 you're going to get updates for.
Right.
But in this case, for Craft Redactor, if you use Composer Update, you're never going to get anything beyond Redactor 2.5.0.
Right.
Because it's locked in on it, right? So my advice is never to mix and match them. Or if you do mix and match them, just know what you're doing and know that if you go from one to the other, you're going to have to do a manual edit of your composer.json file.
I'm going to have to go in and do this, right, on these.
Yeah.
To get myself
If you
back.
want to go from using Craft to using Composer, you're going to need to go in and add a constraint in there. Yeah. And then the final, the fourth path, or the fourth maxim that I had in there for this unwritten as of now article is write frequency. And this doesn't just have to do with Craft. This has to do with just about anything software that needs updates. Update early and update frequently. And you're already
so don't
doing
wait a
it.
year.
No.
Every release increases risk, right?
It's basically like the amount of crap that changes when you let stuff pile up can lead to, it's kind of like a matrix of interactions, and the more stuff grows, the more permutations and interactions there are, the more stuff that can go wrong. You're already doing it in local dev, right? So you can do an easy test, so it's fine, like update early, right? And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, that's fine. It's in local dev, you didn't break anything, no big deal. But if you update frequently, the code surface or the amount that changes with each update is much smaller. And so if something does go wrong, it's usually a small problem.
Right.
If you wait a long time and it's a big update and there's tons of stuff that changes, if something goes wrong, then you've got a big problem, usually with a lot of kind of interactions that go in between all of this stuff that is updating. This goes for servers. Like I knew people, and there still are people who have this mentality that they'll have a VPS somewhere and they just never update the software that's on there.
I don't have no idea who you're talking about.
Well, because they're like, well, it works, so I'm just gonna leave it.
I know someone who every Sunday goes in, runs updates on every single server and reboots them, and so there's you're never surprised by anything, right? It is a regular habit of maintenance.
Well, don't hurt yourself patting yourself on the back.
No, it's actually not me.
But that is a good approach. That is a decent approach to do it. Although I don't know if I'd want to do it on my own Sundays, but whatever. But the real point is that if you do all these little updates, then the problems that you're fixing are small, and your life is just going to be so much easier. And the amount of work that you end up having to do is going to be less. You know what I mean? Like, I realize you might think you're saving time by not doing updates frequently, but trust me, man, like long run, the kind of absolutely soul-sucking, headache-crushing problems when the live production server is just blown up. I knew people that, like I said, they would just leave their server running, and then the only time that they would update stuff is when there was like a major security issue that came out, right? And then they go in and they try to update their server, and just stuff is blowing up all over the place because there's a dependency, like you need the newest version of that. Oh, this old thing that I'm working doesn't work with that. And you just end up in this horrible, horrible spot, Be diligent and organized. It's what your
parents or whoever raised you, hopefully, tried to teach you was haste makes waste, as my 5th grade teacher had above the door of the classroom.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it even goes back to what we're talking about with when you're bringing in all this content or this data about those products, right? Like, take the time ahead of time to think through what you need instead of just pulling it in and then trying to, solve it at the twig level or whatever. Like, just plan, take your time. It's a good thing. Reboot your servers.
Yeah. And all of these small, like I knew people that were scared to reboot their server. They're like, it's working. I don't know if it's going to come up or not. And I'm like, man, you know what? Like, if you don't know whether your server is going to come on again, then you're just asking for trouble, because like when something catastrophic goes wrong, it's never going to be at the right time. And you're going to just, it's going to be 3 a.m. and you're going to be at a data center somewhere or some crap like that. Like, you just don't want to know, like, just know. And I guess I should. So that's the gist of the article. I haven't written it yet. And I'm going to actually explain to people like what semvers are and how Composer works should you decide to go down that path. I should probably tell Andrea the way that I do it. So the way that I do it is I have semvers in my composer.json with the little carets or the tildes, depending on what it is that's in there. And that's the same methodology that I use for my package.json for node module stuff. And I just do a composer update. I do a composer update, local dev, test it, works, great. Deploy the composer.lock, and away you go. And because I put what I consider to be sane semver constraints on things, and also because I'm doing this often, and also because I'm doing this in local dev, I feel perfectly fine doing it that way. I don't feel the need to pin each version number and update just one at a time or anything like that, because it's done with such frequency and it's done in a safe local dev environment that if anything goes wrong, I feel comfortable trying to figure it out. That's just how I do it. Yeah. How about you? How do you do it?
I try to use I use the Craft command line tool.
Mm-hmm.
I do like that I can do Craft update/info and get the info about it.
Yeah, that is nice.
But again, I do it all. I create a branch. Do it all locally, and so it's so low risk, and I know that.
Yeah.
I use zero downtime deploy. I use Envoyer, so like everything.
Why a branch? Why a branch?
What's that?
Why do you do a branch? Like, what do you?
Well, because I'm making changes to files, the composer file and the composer.lock file when you do updates.
But you make a branch to do that?
Yeah, of course.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
I usually just make a feature branch like Craft update and then the version that I'm updating to.
Interesting. So, I don't do that. What I just do is I just do it in develop.
Oh, dear Lord. Oh, good. Where's my Git training notebook? Let me grab that.
Well, I treat it like a hotfix, and I do it in develop, and I just do it.
But hotfixes you don't do in develop. Hotfixes you use hotfix branches for.
Yeah, true. Well, tell me, why is that bad? Like, what am I? Because here's my thought process, and you can tell me how flawed it is, right? My thought process is, look, man, the only thing I'm changing, 99 times out of 10, I'm not even changing the composer.json. The only file that is changing when I update stuff is the composer.lock file. Why am I making a branch for one freaking file? That's my logic.
Yeah, but so I would say if you have branching rules for a project, they should be followed whether you're changing one file or 100 files. Also, the reason I do it is because to me, develop branch has a certain purpose. And that purpose is that it's always, I've shifted on some of the projects because I usually use the Git flow branching model. It can become a little overdone sometimes. So I've used simpler models, but I do for my own project, even for CraftQuest. So the way that works is develop is what you branch off of to go create new feature branches, but it's also it's basically like in line to be king, right? Or queen. It's in line to be merged into the master branch and then deployed into production. So it has to remain stable in a sense. And for that reason, imagine you like something happened. I mean, I know it's only one file, but like just imagine like something happened and I got hosed. Like I'd rather just like switch back to my develop branch and go do something else. Because sometimes I'll try, like I tried to craft 3.5 update. I just wanted to do it. Then I was like, I'm going to actually wait. I'm not going to do it yet because there's some commerce changes. I'm pretty like careful about commerce changes. I like to read up on exactly what's changed, so I'm not breaking my site. And so I always do everything in a branch because I might just shift back and work on another feature or work on something else.
Well, let's say you're updating a bunch of stuff. Like, do you create a branch for every, like if you're updating commerce, do you create a branch for the commerce update and do
good
that?
Question. So I create a branch for when I'm updating Craft Core, the core application, its own branch. I create a branch for commerce because even though it's a plugin that is so critical to CraftQuest in this case, but then I have another branch that's just for plugins. Sometimes I used to do it where I'll just do discrete commits. So the update to Craft would be a commit, the update to commerce would be a commit, and the update to plugins. I don't do it for individual. I feel like if you have your plugins under control, you shouldn't have like 800 plugins to have to worry about updates to. So
well, no, okay, so it makes sense that you would use the Craft CLI then, because then, well, you can still do it with Composer actually.
No,
you can update
you can.
just a particular.
I just
thing.
like the because I'm already in there. Like, it runs. I think it runs migrations automatically, right? When you do the updates,
if you use the Craft updater, it does.
Yeah.
If you use Composer,
you have to run Craft migrate
only.
All.
Well, I just do it as a Composer script, so it automatically does. It automatically clears the caches, runs migrations, and does project config sync/apply. Whenever you do anything, like it will do those three things for you.
So Jalen asked, he said, how do you shift branches? Doesn't your database change? Like in the example where we upgraded 3.5 and then switched back to 3.4, isn't your database migrated 3.5 already? It might be. So I actually like have like this like carousel of databases. I just I'll have a new one that'll be for 3.5. So I don't ever want to be locked in, and it's all local, right? So it's not like I can just go grab production again. Yeah. So it's not a big deal. But the main thing is that when I'm deploying to production, like I want to be able to like, deploy an Envoy and walk away and not have a worry in the world that deployment's gonna hose my site.
So I gotta say, I don't know that I'm convinced. I'm willing to give it a shot. I'll give it a try. What I'm worried about is whether it's.
Would you commit directly to develop for anything else? It's not like if you were building if you were.
Occasionally, like very occasionally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just might be my personality.
Yeah. Well, no. I mean, so here's the thing. What I'm worried about, so this gets back to me being somewhat lazy in some ways. I try to like I will put maximum effort in areas where I think maximum effort is deserved.
Right.
But in areas where I don't think it's deserved, like I'm cool with just not doing it. And I realize that that's not German, right? I know it's not the German way, so it's rubbing you the wrong way.
I know what you're saying though. Like it's like, is that like are you getting a good return on that investment of time if put in sort of like monetary terms, right? Like
the whole idea of like bureaucrats shuffling paper, like that irritates me. And at some point, depending on what you're doing, like it definitely can get to the point where you're doing the equivalent of something just so bureaucratic that you're just like you're spending so much time just shuffling the papers around that, when are you going to actually get the important stuff done, right? So the reason why this bothers me.
So the 3 seconds it takes to type git branch.
No. It's more than that. So I
Okay.
don't mind the branch part.
Well,
I
what
don't
is
really
it?
mind the branch part. What I mind is that then I have to do discrete updates. I have to say, I'm going to update just Craft. And then I have to say, I'm going to update just this plugin. I'm going to update just Commerce. I'm going to update just that.
But
I
it,
want to just be able to be like, I'm updating everything. Then I'm going to test it all. If everything works, then I'm going to deploy it. Like, I don't want to have to do multiple steps with either multiple branches or multiple commits
yeah, but
when I'm doing the updates.
it's more methodical though to
Oh,
update,
I know.
test, update, test. I mean, it's like one of my first jobs
No
out of
question.
grad school was like QA for a shipping, a team that shipped like client like Mac and Windows software. And
Right.
so, and I was telling someone this today that like working with them was such like an eye-opening experience because they didn't let anything get by, right? Like if I had like bad like user scenarios or test cases, like they would like call you
Yeah.
out on it, right? And it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Like if I wasn't methodical about how I was testing things, then it was bad results. So
I get it.
yeah. Anyway,
There's a book that I read a long time ago that it will bother the crap out of type A people and perfectionists.
I'm
And
glad you're
the
not
book-
calling me out as one, but go ahead.
And the book was entitled When Good Enough is Best. And the kind of the gist of it is like there's certain scenarios where doing something good enough
Right.
is the best way to do
But
it.
you know me enough to know that in like project work, like even with
Yeah.
CraftQuest, like there's
Yeah.
so many imperfect things on
Right.
that site. I mean, you've seen the code. Like there's so many imperfect things, but the goal of the site wasn't purity of code. The goal of the site was to ship something that where I can publish videos, right?
Right.
And teach people. That was
Sure.
the goal. So that's like
Right.
I think maybe at the micro
Okay. Oh, no.
level.
I think I got it, Ryan. So you're saying
Oh no.
the reason you haven't done some of the structural improvements to the site is because you're spending so much goddamn time creating branches and methodically updating the stupid thing that you have no time to do the important improvements. Is that what you're telling me?
I'm telling you that I got teams coming to the site. That's what I'm telling you.
Okay.
All
All
right.
right.
We have,
But you know what I mean? Okay. So in an event,
that ended up
for
being
what
quite
it's worth.
the rant by you.
Yeah. I know. I was just kidding.
I know. I just
Um,
wasn't.
But I do have that kind of philosophy of good enough is best for certain things. And for me, this is one of them. Now, it obviously depends on the site, right? If we're talking about a large site with a team of people that are working on it, then I'm all on board with creating these branches. Like I'm with you,
Yeah.
right? But for some smaller sites, like for the dev mode site or
You could
the
do
NY
everything
Studio site,
and develop for that.
well, okay, yeah, but I thought you told me that if I'm going to do it for one thing, I should do it for all of them.
No. I mean, I'm just saying you could because it doesn't really impact anyone else. And
Right. So that's where I'm going to put a caveat in is that if you do have teams of people, probably it is better. And probably you don't want like that one annoying guy to be like, you said this was updating Craft and it also updated the FeedMe plugin at the same time. This is not acceptable, right?
PR
You don't want to deal with
denied,
that.
closed.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But one thing Andrea asked is what happens when an update goes wrong? And you kind of touched on that when you answered Jalen. But what happens when, first of all, she said, what do you do when you have to roll back? Right. So first of all, Andrea, I'm not a quitter. Okay. I ain't rolling back. I'm not a quitter. I'm going to figure out what's wrong and I'm going to fix it. Okay.
It's just software. We can fix
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, you can fix anything in software. But no, if you do need to roll back, like you said, Ryan, it's not a big deal. Like just set the Semver back to whatever you need it to be, or do whatever it is, revert changes or whatever.
Yeah.
In the composer.lock, and then
Or
for
just,
the database,
or if you're in a branch, you can just change branches.
or
And
that,
then
or just switch branches.
wow,
So that's a good
imagine,
advantage.
Imagine just using Git for what it's supposed to do.
There you go. That's a good advantage.
Or you
for-
just
for that.
buy a new laptop. If you didn't want to use Git properly, just buy a new laptop, and then you're good.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Like, why not?
Yeah, why don't you do that?
I like it.
Why don't you buy one after this?
But the other thing is the database part of it. So I have scripts that just pull my database down, right? So I pull down the production database. So it's an exact copy of what's up there. And then I do the update and then I test it, right? And if something went wrong, okay, I just pull the database down again. And if I'm going to be a quitter like Ryan, then I just leave it that way. I revert the composer.lock, but I don't quit, okay? I pull it down again. I get it working, even though it's not in its own separate little branch.
But to your credit, though, you develop locally via Docker, right?
Yes.
So I don't. Well, I think we're gonna do another live stream on that where you're gonna try to convert me to that. I'm gonna have my own question, but
I'm sorry. Did you say I'm going to berate you?
Convert.
What?
Convert.
Oh, berate. Okay.
As in your religion. Okay. But you actually have a more predictable update process because you probably match the local development version of like PHP and stuff like that to whatever you're deploying to on the server. Whereas I might not. Like my local machine might be running 7.3 and my server's running 7.4. So again, like no Git workflow is going to help that.
Yeah, and that's the next step in the evolution of what I'm doing is I'm going to be deploying these Docker containers. So then it's like literally going to be the same thing,
Yeah.
But yeah.
So Andrew asked, what about, it's only Composer Lock, what about Project Config? Does it touch Project Config? I don't think it does, right? Unless does it actually touch the date? I've had it where it's just like, it just updates the date. You're just like,
no, so
I think it's
what
only
I do
Composer files.
The only way Project Config would be affected by this is if you did Project Config rebuild. Because whenever you do sync or apply, so it used to be called sync, and now in Craft 3.5, it's the same command, but it's called apply. What it does is it takes the Project Config files on disk and applies them to the database, right? It's only when you do a rebuild that it goes the other way, and it takes what's in the database and uses that to write out and change the project config files. There may be other things potentially that could change that. But again, like you said, Ryan, like if you do it in a branch, just, whatever.
Just use Git for what it's for, and then you'll be all right. You wouldn't have to worry about anything.
Yeah, I mean, you just delete the branch and start over, you can do whatever.
Yeah, I've done that before.
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
I also have a lot of abandoned branches. Okay. So we just had Joe come into the chat, and he said he was just knowing.
Freaking Joe, always showing up late, Joe. How dare you?
And so he said, "Hey, I actually submitted a question. Have you guys answered it yet?" And we hadn't. So let's actually talk about Joe's question. We're gonna, we're here for the.
Should we be rewarding bad behavior? Him showing up this late?
I'm happy for everyone that shows up, no matter when they show up, and even if it's an hour and 15 minutes into the live stream.
Yeah.
So Joe, you came just at the right time. So Joe says, he said, I've experienced a real slowdown with Craft running on some servers. I like how I have this in Vim, just completely like full width. From my understanding, the server resources exceed the requirements outlined in the docs. The CMS is up to date and the cache is cleared regularly. Understand that front-end performance testing is not a qualitative measure, although the page speed timings from Google Analytics do not appear to correlate with site usage. So I'm wondering so this is a question.
What you're reading is not what's on the screen, by the way.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Where does it say anything about analytics and what you just pasted in there?
Right here.
Where?
Here. Are you looking at the...
Oh, the whole thing. My bad.
You're looking at the bottom. I updated my Vim document here. I'm wondering
I didn't realize you were a barbarian and you were using multiple returns between paragraphs.
I just pasted in from the Airtable, so our dear viewer Joe actually is the one that did the multiple returns. So
blame the viewer. That's nice, Ryan.
And he's from New Zealand, and the New Zealanders know a lot of things, including how to beat a pandemic. So we're going to give them all the respect.
What does the country he's from have to do with anything, Ryan?
So I'm wondering. So Joe says, I'm wondering what.
Do you have unconscious bias?
So
what is going on?
Joe says, I'm wondering what methods I can use to determine if the issue is related to the server, right? Performance issue. Is it a server thing? And to what end? He's aware that there's lots to be done to improve performance in craft, eager loading, use a CDN, and they can
Yeah.
improve on that side. But like server benchmarking, understanding if and when it makes sense to switch servers, hosting providers, maybe even if you're running like on AWS, is it time to upgrade the instance? That's actually
Mhm.
kind of an easy one, right? You can just monitor it. But so what do you think? When is it all about, pimping out the getting all the efficiencies out of craft versus just like, we just actually need like a more a beefier server than we have right now?
Well, okay. So I'll answer that general question, and then I'll get into kind of what he asked too. So the general question about like, should I be optimizing craft or should I just throw more hardware at it? It's whichever is cheaper. And I mean that over, a reasonable period of time. Like what I typically do is I do benchmarking and auditing. Just don't say it, Ryan. I know I never did that auditing for you.
That's right. Well, at least I never got an invoice.
Yeah. Is I do benchmarking just to see if there are any low-hanging fruit, right? And if there are like very simple things that could be done to your craft install, for instance, to fix it, great. Do that. And I wrote an article on nystudio107.com. If you search on profiling, I believe, it walks you through how you can use the Yi debug toolbar to profile your site. And that will give you a good idea of whether it is craft CMS that is causing the issue, or your slow queries or that kind of stuff. You can spend you can spend an hour or two, probably less than an hour actually, profiling using the debug toolbar just to see what it says in terms of what is taking the time, and then you can make a more informed decision from there. But what I would really want to know, to answer his specific question, is, what kind of hosting are we talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're talking about shared hosting, like I can't answer your question. Like I have no idea. It could be other hosts that are other websites on the site that are causing the slowdown. So, the first thing I would recommend to anybody is if you're using shared hosting, like just stop doing it. Spin up a VPS.
They're so cheap now, and in some cases cheaper than shared hosting.
Often cheaper,
Yeah.
but then everything's isolated, right? So not only are things isolated from a performance perspective, but if you do have some kind of a security breach or vulnerability, everything is isolated, right, into this one little instance, this one little island. So Joe, it would really depend on what type of hosting you have. And if it is shared hosting, I would just say find a new host. Find a host that is not shared. You're down in New Zealand. I know that Vulture has a presence in Sydney, for instance. I'm not that familiar with points of presences in New Zealand. So if it's local businesses, obviously it's going to make sense to host it on some kind of a New Zealand server.
But you could also, if you wanted AWS, though, you can choose the region, and so you can get one that is in a region near you. So if you wanted something close by, and even AWS has something called a Lightsail. Have you heard of that before?
I have, yeah.
Well, you don't sound very excited about it, but so I don't know if they let you choose your region or not. Let me see. They might not. That might be part of it. But you can see like a 32 gig, 8-core processor with more than a half a terabyte of disk space for $160 a month and down. Like that's
right.
That's so cheap for that
right.
much.
I'm just saying. I'm saying that if they live on the island of New Zealand,
right,
it very well could be that the latency and other nonsense involved in the cabling that comes over from the point of presence in Sydney, if it's just a local business, like it may not be worth it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd have to test it and look into it.
Definitely don't host it in US East 1. You don't want to do that.
No, don't do
That's
that.
the AWS, the availability zone.
Although I have done that. Like I set up redundant servers. Like they were worried about like we solved for the meteor hits your city problem.
Right.
And you just host it somewhere completely different so that if there is some kind of catastrophe, it's far enough away that it's isolated.
Yeah.
You know?
So he said he thinks it's a VPS, which is good.
Yeah.
And he's wondering if the VPS could vary over time. So Joe, right before you tuned in, Andrew was talking about like the regular maintenance of a virtual private server where you do have to run the updates and reboot it. So that could potentially, it could be that your site can also outgrow the VPS too, whether that's traffic or what you're asking it to do. So there's all sorts of things to consider there as well.
So he says he's using SiteHost. I have no familiarity with them. I mean, it may be wonderful. It may be awful. I have no idea. I really don't know. But what I would do is what I mentioned, Joe, is I would do some profiling using the Yi debug toolbar and that article. Because what that lets you do is it lets you rule out or in whether it's the craft layer that's causing the problem, right? Mm-hmm. And if the timings and everything looks pretty reasonable on the craft side of things, then okay, then it's time to start looking at the server end, you know? But I don't think that. So servers are relatively deterministic, right? I mean, if they're going to take a lot of time to do something, it's because they're doing a lot of work, typically. I can't think of a scenario where a VPS would wildly vary unless what it's doing wildly varies over time. One thing that can definitely cause major issues is if you do have a VPS and it's only got a certain amount of memory, what it does, if you're using more than that, is it does what's called swap, where it takes stuff that was in physical memory and it writes it out to the disk so that it can read it in later if it needs to act like it's got more memory than it really does.
And that is slow.
If your server starts swapping, that's going to be really slow. Yeah, for sure. And what I do, just to look at servers real quick, is I'll SSH in, and I use a tool called HTOP.
Yep. I was just going to bring that up.
Yeah, which is great for just monitoring stuff. So yeah, why don't you SSH into a server and show them HTOP running, you know?
I don't know, sorry, but go ahead, keep talking.
Yeah, so, and what HTOP will do is just give you a good idea of what is running, what is using up, all the processors, and it does a really good job in a very readable format to give you an idea of what is going on your server. What are we doing, Ryan? We SSHing in here or what?
Yeah, just give me 1 second here.
What? Oh my God, Ryan left.
No, I'm here. I'm just, I don't have the, on this machine I have.
Let's go to any server. If it's not installed, we'll install it. Take 2 seconds.
All right.
Wait. Yeah, so here's HTOP running. And if there was more than one CPU, you'd see more than one little bar there, right? And memory is all listed there.
So the swap is the last one here, right?
Yeah, and then there's swap, right? But what you can tell is the load average. So a single processor, a single threaded machine is at maximum. Basically, this is saying how long it takes it to service a request. When it's at 1.0, it's falling. It's exactly at full capacity, right. Basically. If you have 4 processors, it would need to be at 4.0 for it to be at maximum capacity.
If it was 1, then it should be sharing 25%. It should be using 25% of the CPU capacity.
Yeah. And then the other thing to look at is the memory.
Just notice my uptime. Don't look at that. Go ahead.
Well, I actually have a comment for that already. Don't worry. But the memory, the stuff to look at here, I forget. Green is either user or system. I forget which. And then blue is the other. So one is user, one is system. I forget which is which. And then yellow is cache. And you actually always want to see your memory bar completely full. You always want it completely full, because what should be happening is any extra memory should be used as a cache of some kind. So you can think of all of that yellow stuff like it's fantastic that it's there and it's filling the whole bar, because like wasted memory is wasted memory, you know? So you really do want it to be used there. But so take a look at, for instance, like hit Control C for a second, Ryan, and we'll bring it back up. So we were talking earlier about updating frequently and updating often. So you can see there's 114 packages that can be updated, 4 of which are security updates. So
We're not doing this live, by the way.
This is a case where you probably would want to update this VPS, and then go back to the HTOP. You hit up arrow and hit return. You can see the uptime, and even HTOP is shocked
with
that
the exclamation point
is 242 days.
Noted.
Yeah.
And I will. I'll have to work on that this weekend. So one thing to note, Joe, is also think about what you're asking your server to do. Does your server also host the database? Because you're actually asking it to do 2 jobs. You're asking it to not only serve up all the requests and everything that goes with it, you're also asking it to run a database. Your best case scenario, like this server, actually, the reason I can get away with like not a real beefy server, because actually the database isn't anywhere on this. This is a completely, this is holds just web file, like just deployed files, and just serves them up on PHP. That's all it does. And some Redis.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with having the database on the same server if you want.
No, you're just asking it to do more, though.
Right. And you're right. Like, be conscious of that. And a good example of that, I think, would be if you're doing tons and tons of image transforms, a server that would be perfect for handling the day-to-day traffic might be severely swamped by having to do all of those image transforms when tons of new images are uploaded, for instance, which is why some people are using image transform services like ImageX, or they're rolling their own via Lambda function or whatever. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, just like compartmentalization is good for a whole lot of different stuff, it can also be good for a server. You've got your assets are in S3, your transforms are done via ImageX, your database is served via RDS or whatever.
Yeah, I actually want to do a whole live stream on the whole, just that way. It's like anything about anything. It's like thinking about content. It's just that you you divide the labor up, and you make sure that no one point is going to be that single point of failure. Like this server is disposable. The IP address is immediately reassignable to another instance. So there's just a different way of thinking.
And so he's asking, should there be a remote database in AWS or something? And I told him I think a database running on the server itself is fine, because here's the thing, like the time when I'm good with using RDS is when I'm using AWS for the rest of the infrastructure
absolutely.
too. Because then you've got a fast path from the server to the database instance.
You're not hopping over the internet.
Yeah, if you're using SiteHost or whoever they are, and then you spin up an RDS database too, like that's going to be slow as balls, and it's not going to be good.
No, don't do that. But if you already, if your host offers dedicated database servers, it might be something to think about. But again, I feel like there's a lot to do to diagnose the issues before you get there. Before you spend money, you could, it could just be looking at like eager loading could actually fix a lot of stuff. You just don't know. So I would jump in.
And like I answered early, like it kind of depends on whichever is cheapest. So spend a little bit of time doing it. So for instance, I know someone that they were launching a site for a pretty big company, and they knew what was wrong with the site. They knew the performance issues, but the amount of time and money that it would take to fix that wasn't worth it given the launch window that they had. So they just cranked up the VPS.
Yeah.
Like they backed up a pile of money. So here you go. Like just serve our horrible, inefficient site, And
that's why, like you were accusing me of being some sort of Git purist, but I have a very strong pragmatic streak and something like that, right? Like there's money and budgets solve things. People like it just depends because a team of software developers, software engineers can be expensive too. It can be
very much so.
It could be much more expensive than just doubling your server capacity for a year. So
and any code that you write is creating more tech debt, creating more things that need to be maintained. So all those things are true. I think I'm pretty pragmatic too, and I lean towards not running like a really big beefy VPS, and I lean towards doing stuff like, well, put a static cache on it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And architect it to use that from the beginning, because it's shocking what kind of amazing performance you can get out of sites and how tiny of a VPS you can use if you architect it smartly from the beginning, you know?
Yep. All right. Well, I think that's about good for 90 minutes of nerdery here with our friends in the
I'm
chat.
still not done though.
Oh,
I still
well,
got.
let's everybody watch Andrew
You want me to chug and choke on the
that,
content?
and then we'll get off the air quickly before things go awry.
That's horrible.
Thanks
That's
everyone for hanging out with us today. And if you're watching this on the recording,
gonna do
then
it.
if you scroll down, there's the links with everything we talked about. I'll try to include as many as I can. I try to save the tabs that I have here
Smooth.
on my screen, and I'll try to drop those all in so you can follow along with the links as we talk about them on the live stream. If you have more questions, you can go to craftquest.io/ on-call. Almost forgot the URL. And I actually have not Brandon. That's not your name. Your name is Andrew.
Yeah, I'm Brandon Light.
That's so good.
I'm discount Brandon.
I have a new idea for on-call to kind of make it a bigger part of the site. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that off the air. All right. So that's it. Thanks everyone for joining us. We will see you. We're here every other week. So our next one is on I think the 3rd of September. So our next one is in the month of September. The year is flying by as we all hunker down. So it's a perfect time for live streams because we can all hang out together, socially distanced. Except in New Zealand, because they're just rocking it with the pandemic. All right. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you on the next live stream. Take care.
Bye-bye.